Den-e, The Transmission of the Robe, by Eihei Dogen, from Shobogenzo, The Treasury of the True Dharma Eye. The authentic transmission into China of the robe and the Dharma, which are authentically transmitted from Buddha to Buddha, was done only by the founding patriarch of Shaolin Temple. The founding patriarch was the 28th ancestral master after Shakyamuni Buddha. The robe had passed from rightful successor to rightful successor through 28 generations in India, and it was personally and authentically transmitted through 6 generations in China. Altogether, it was transmitted through 33 generations in the Western Heavens and the Eastern lands. The 33rd Patriarch, Zen Master Daikan, received the authentic transmission of this robe and Dharma on Obai in the middle of the night, and he guarded and retained the robe until his death. It is now still deposited at Horinji Temple on Shobogenzo Mountain. Many generations of emperors in succession requested that it be brought into the palace, where they served offerings to it. They guarded the robe as a sacred object. The Tang dynasty emperors, Chuso, Sukuso, and Daiso, frequently had the robe brought to court and served offerings to it. Both when they requested it and when they sent it back, they would dispatch an imperial emissary and issue an edict. This is the manner in which they honoured the robe. Emperor Daiso once returned the Buddha's robe to Shobogenzo Mountain with the following edict: I now dispatch the great general Ryo Sokai, pacifier of the nation, to receive with courtesy and to deliver the robe. I consider it to be a national treasure. Venerable priests, deposit it in its original temple. Let it be solemnly guarded by monks who have intimately received the fundamental teaching. Never let it fall into neglect. Thus, the emperors of several generations each esteemed the robe as an important national treasure. Truly, to retain this Buddha's robes in one's country is a superlative great treasure, which surpasses even dominion over the worlds, as countless as the sands of the Ganges, in a 3,000 great thousandfold world. We should never compare it with Benka's gem. A gem may become the national seal of state, but how can it become the rare jewel which transmits the Buddha's state? From the Tang dynasty onwards, the monks and laymen who admired and bowed to the Kesaya were all, without exception, people of great makings who believed in the Dharma. If not abided by good conduct in the past, how else will we be able to prostrate this body in admiration to the Buddha's robe, which has been directly and authentically transmitted from Buddha to Buddha? Skin, flesh, bones, and marrow that believe in and receive the robe should rejoice. Those that cannot believe in and receive the robe should feel regret, even though the situation is of their own doing, that they are not the embryos of Buddhas. Even secular teaching says that to look at a person's behaviour is just to look at that person. To have admired and to have bowed now to the Buddha's robe is just to be looking at the Buddha. We should erect hundreds, thousands, and tens of thousands of stupas and serve offerings to this Buddha robe. In the heavens above and in the ocean's depths, whatever has mind should value the robe. In the human world too, sacred wheel-rolling kings and others who know what is true and know what is superior should value the robe. It is pitiful that the people who became, in generation after generation, the rulers of the land, never knew what an important treasure existed in their own country. Deluded by the teachings of Taoists, many of them abolished the Buddha Dharma. At such times, instead of wearing the kashaya, they covered their round heads with Taoist caps. The lectures they listened to were on how to extend one's lifespan and to prolong one's years. There were emperors like this, both during the Tang dynasty and during the Song dynasty. These fellows were rulers of the nation, but they must have been more vulgar than the common people. They should have quietly reflected that the Buddha's robe had remained and was actually present in their own country. They might even have considered that their country was the Buddha land of the robe. The kashaya may surpass even sacred bones, and so on. Wheel-rolling kings have bones, as do lions, human beings, Pratyeka Buddhas, and the like. But wheel-rolling kings do not have the kashaya. Lions do not have the kashaya. Human beings do not have the kashaya. Only Buddhas have the kashaya. We should believe this profoundly. Stupid people today often revere bones, but fail to know the kashaya. Few know that they should guard and retain their own kashaya. This situation has arisen because few people have ever heard of the importance of the kashaya, and even these few have never heard of the authentic transmission of the Buddha Dharma. When we attentively think back to the time when Shakyamuni was in the world, it is little more than 2,000 years. Many national treasures and sacred objects have been transmitted to the present for longer than this. This Buddha Dharma and Buddha robe are recent and new. The benefit of their propagation through the fields and villages, even if there have been 50 propagations, is wonderful. The qualities of those things are obvious, but this Buddha robe can never be the same as those things. Those things are not received in the authentic transmission from rightful successors, but this robe has been received in the authentic transmission from rightful successors. Remember, we attain the truth when listening to a 4-line verse, and we attain the state of truth when listening to a single phrase. Why is it that a 4-line verse and a single phrase can have such mystical effect? Because they are the Buddha Dharma. Now each robe, and all 9 kinds of robe, have been received in the authentic transmission from the Buddha Dharma itself. The robe could never be inferior to a 4-line verse, and could never be less effective than a single phrase of Dharma. This is why, for more than 2,000 years, all followers of the Buddha, those with the makings of devotional practice and of Dharma practice, have guarded and retained the kashaya and regarded it as their body and mind. Those who are ignorant of the right Dharma of the Buddhas do not worship the kashaya. Now, such beings as Sakra Devanam Indra and the Dragon King, Anavatapta, Though they are the celestial rulers of laymen and the king of dragons, have guarded and retained the Kashaya. Yet people who shave the head, people who call themselves disciples of the Buddha, do not know that they should receive and retain the Kashaya. How much less could they know its material, colour, and measurements? How much less could they know the method of wearing it? And how much less could they have seen the dignified conventions for it, even in a dream? The Kashaya has been called since olden times the clothing that wards off suffering from heat, and the clothing of liberation. In conclusion, its merit is beyond measure. Through the merit of the Kashaya, a dragon's scales can be freed from the 3 kinds of burning pain. When the Buddhas realize the truth, they are always wearing this robe. Truly, although we were born in a remote land in the age of the latter Dharma, if we have the opportunity to choose between what has been transmitted and what has not been transmitted, we should believe in, receive, guard, and retain the robe whose transmission is authentic and traditional. In what lineage have both the robe and the Dharma of Shakyamuni himself been authentically transmitted, as in our authentic tradition? They exist only in Buddhism. On meeting this robe and Dharma, who could be lax in venerating them and serving offerings to them? Even if each day we have to discard bodies and lives as countless as the sands of the Ganges, we should serve offerings to them. Further, we should vow to meet the robe and humbly to receive it upon the head in every life, in every age. We are the stupid people of a remote quarter, born with 100,000 or so miles of mountains and oceans, separating us from the land of the Buddha's birth. Even so, if we hear this right Dharma, if we receive and retain this Kashaya, even for a single day or a single night, and if we master even a single phrase or a single verse, that will not only be the good fortune to have served offerings to one Buddha or to 2 Buddhas, it will be the good fortune to have served offerings and paid homage to countless 100,000 kotis of Buddhas. Even if the servants are ourselves, we should respect them, we should love them, and we should value them. We should heartily repay the great benevolence of the ancestral master in transmitting the Dharma. Even animals repay kindness. How could human beings fail to recognize kindness? If we failed to recognize kindness, we would be inferior to animals, more stupid than animals. People other than the ancestral masters, who transmit the Buddha's right Dharma, have never known the merit of this Buddha robe, even in a dream. How much less could they clarify its material, colour, and measurements? If we long to follow the traces of the Buddhas, we should just long for this transmission. Even after 100,000 myriads of generations, the authentic reception of this authentic transmission will still be just the Buddha Dharma itself. The evidence for this is clear. Even secular teaching says, one does not wear clothing different from the clothing of the past king, and one does not follow laws different from those of the past king. Buddhism is also like that. We should not wear what is different from the Dharma clothing of past Buddhas. If our clothes were different from the Dharma clothing of past Buddhas, what could we wear to practice Buddhism and to serve Buddhas? Without wearing this clothing, it might be difficult to enter the Buddha's order. Since the years of the Eihei period, during the reign of Emperor Komei of the later Han dynasty, monks arriving in the eastern lands from the western heavens have followed on each other's heels without cease. We often hear of monks going from China to India, but it is not said that they ever met anyone who gave them the face-to-face transmission of the Buddha Dharma. They have only names and forms, learned in vain from teachers of commentaries and scholars of the Tripitaka. They have not heard the authentic tradition of the Buddha Dharma. This is why they cannot even report that we should receive the authentic transmission of the Buddha's robe, why they can never claim to have met a person who has received the authentic transmission of the Buddha's robe, and why they never mention seeing or hearing a person who has received the transmission of the robe. Clearly, they have never entered beyond the threshold of the house of Buddha. That these fellows recognize the robe solely as a garment, not knowing that it is in the Buddha Dharma an object of honor and worship, is truly pitiful. Rightful successors to the transmission of the Buddha's Dharma treasury also transmit and receive the Buddha's robe. The principle that the ancestral masters who receive the authentic transmission of the Dharma treasury have never gone without seeing and hearing the Buddha's robe is widely known among human beings and in the heavens above. This being so, the material, color, and measurements of the Buddha's Kashaya have been authentically transmitted and authentically seen and heard. The great merits of the Buddha's Kashaya have been authentically transmitted, and the body, mind, bones, and marrow of the Buddha's Kashaya have been authentically transmitted, only in the customs of the traditional lineage. This authentic transmission is not known in the various schools which follow the teachings of the Agamas. The robes that individuals have established independently, according to the idea of the moment, are not traditional and not legitimate. When our great master, Shakyamuni Tathagata, passed on the right Dharma eye treasury and the supreme state of Bodhi to Mahakasyapa, he transmitted them together with the Buddha robe. Between then and Zen Master Daikan of Sokezan Mountain, there were 33 generations, the transmission passing from rightful successor to rightful successor. The intimate experience and intimate transmission of the robe's material, color, and measurements have long been handed down by the lineages, and their reception and retention are evident in the present. That is to say, that which was received and retained by each of the founding patriarchs of the 5 sects is the authentic tradition. Similarly evident are the wearing of the robe according to the methods of former Buddhas, and the making of the robe according to the methods of former Buddhas, which Buddhas alone, together with Buddhas, through generations have transmitted and have experienced as the same state, in some cases for over 50 generations, and in some cases for over 40 generations, without confusion between any master and disciple. The Buddha's instruction, as authentically transmitted from rightful successor to rightful successor, is as follows. Robe of 9 stripes, 3 long segments, 1 short segment, or 4 long, 1 short. Robe of 11 stripes, 3 long, 1 short, or 4 long, 1 short. Robe of 13 stripes, 3 long, 1 short, or 4 long, 1 short. Robe of 15 stripes, 3 long, 1 short. Robe of 17 stripes, 3 long, 1 short. Robe of 19 stripes, 3 long, 1 short. Robe of 21 stripes, 4 long, 1 short. Robe of 23 stripes, 4 long, 1 short. Robe of 25 stripes, 4 long, 1 short. Robe of 250 stripes, 4 long, 1 short. Robe of 84,000 stripes, 8 long, 1 short. This is an abbreviated list. There are many other kinds of kashaya beside these, all of which may be the samgati robe. Some receive and retain the kashaya as lay people, and some receive and retain the kashaya as monks and nuns. To receive and to retain the kashaya means to wear it, not to keep it idly folded. Even if people shave off hair and beard, if they do not receive and retain the kashaya, if they hate the kashaya or fear the kashaya, they are celestial demons and non-Buddhists. Zen Master Hyakujo Daichi says, "Those who have not accumulated good seeds in the past detest the kashaya and hate the kashaya. They fear and hate the right Dharma." The Buddha says, "If any living being, having entered my Dharma, commits the grave sins or falls into wrong views, but in a single moment of consciousness, this person with reverent mind honors the Sangati robe. The Buddhas and I will give affirmation without fail that this person will be able to become a Buddha in the 3 vehicles." Gods or dragons or human beings or demons, if able to revere the merit of even a small part of this person's kashaya, will at once attain the 3 vehicles and will neither regress nor stray. If ghosts and living beings can obtain even 4 inches of the kashaya, they will eat and drink their fill. When living beings offend each other and are about to fall into wrong views, if they remember the power of the kashaya, through the power of the kashaya, they will duly feel compassion, and they will be able to return to the state of purity. If people on a battlefield keep a small part of this kashaya, venerating it and honoring it, they will obtain salvation. Thus, we have seen that the merits of the Kashaya are supreme and unthinkable. When we believe in, receive, guard, and retain it, we will surely get the state of affirmation and get the state of not regressing. Not only Shakyamuni Buddha, but all the Buddhas also have preached like this. Remember, the substance and form of the Buddhas themselves is just the Kashaya. This is why the Buddha says, those who are going to fall into wrong ways hate the Samgati robe. This being so, if hateful thoughts arise when we see and hear of the Kashaya, we should feel sorry that our own body is going to fall into wrong ways, and we should repent and confess. Furthermore, when Shakyamuni Buddha first left the royal palace and was going to enter the mountains, a tree god, the story goes, holds up a Samgati robe and says to Shakyamuni Buddha, "If you receive this robe upon your head, you will escape the disturbances of demons." Then Shakyamuni Buddha accepts this robe, humbly receiving it upon his head, and for 12 years he does not set it aside, even for a moment. This is the teaching of the Agama Sutras. Elsewhere it is said that the Kashaya is a garment of good fortune, and that those who wear it always reach exalted rank. In general, there has never been a moment when this Samgati robe was not manifesting itself before us in the world. The manifestation before us of one moment is an eternal matter, and eternal matters come at one moment. To obtain the Kashaya is to obtain the Buddha's banner. For this reason, none of the Buddha Tathagatas has ever failed to receive and to retain the Kashaya. And no person who has received and retained the Kashaya has failed to become Buddha. The method of wearing the Kashaya. To bear only the right shoulder is the usual method. There is also a method of wearing the Kashaya so that it covers both shoulders. When we wear both sides over the left arm and shoulder, we wear the front edge on the outside and the back edge on the inside. This is one instance of Buddhist dignified behavior. This behavior is neither seen and heard, nor transmitted and received by the various groups of Shravakas. Their scriptures on the teachings of the Agamas do not mention it at all. In general, the dignified behavior of wearing the Kashaya in Buddhism has been unfailingly received and retained by the ancestral masters who received the transmission of the right Dharma and who are present before us, here and now. When receiving and retaining the Kashaya, we should unfailingly receive and retain it under such an ancestral master. The traditional Kashaya of the Buddhist patriarchs has been authentically transmitted from Buddha to Buddha without irregularity. It is the Kashaya of former Buddhas and of later Buddhas, the Kashaya of ancient Buddhas and of recent Buddhas. When they transform the state of truth, when they transform the state of Buddha, when they transform the past, when they transform the present, and when they transform the future, they transmit the authentic tradition from the past to the present. They transmit the authentic tradition from the present to the future. They transmit the authentic tradition from the present to the past. They transmit the authentic tradition from the past to the past. They transmit the authentic tradition from the present to the present. They transmit the authentic tradition from the future to the future. They transmit the authentic tradition from the future to the present. And they transmit the authentic tradition from the future to the past. And this is the authentic transmission of Buddhas alone, together with Buddhas. For this reason, for several hundred years after the ancestral master came from the West, from the great Tang to the great Sung dynasties, many of those accomplished at lecturing on sutras were able to see through their own behavior. And when people of philosophical schools, of precepts and so on, entered the Buddha Dharma, they threw away the shabby old robes that had formerly been their kashaya, and they authentically received the traditional kashaya of Buddhism. Their stories appear one after the other in records of the torch, such as Dentoroku, Kotoroku, Sokutoroku, Futoroku, and so on. When they were liberated from the small view, which is limited thinking about philosophy and precepts, and they revered the great truth authentically transmitted by the Buddhist patriarchs, they all became Buddhist patriarchs. People today also should learn from the ancestral masters of the past. If we would like to receive and to retain the kashaya, we should receive the authentic transmission of, and should believe in, the traditional kashaya. We should not receive and retain a fake kashaya. The traditional kashaya means the kashaya now authentically transmitted from Shaolin Temple and Soke Mountain. Its reception from the Tathagata in the transmission from rightful successor to rightful successor has never been interrupted for even a single generation. For this reason, we have exactly received the practice of the truth, and we have intimately obtained in our own hands the Buddha's robe. And this is the reason we should receive the authentic transmission. The Buddha's state of truth is authentically transmitted in the Buddha's state of truth. It is not left for lazy people to receive at leisure. A secular proverb says, "Hearing 1,000 times is not as good as seeing once, and seeing 1,000 times is not as good as experiencing once." Reflecting on this, we can say that even if we see the kashaya 1,000 times and hear of it 10,000 times, that is not as good as getting it once, and never as good as to have received the authentic transmission of the Buddha's robe. If we can doubt those who have authentic traditions, we should doubt all the more those who have never seen the authentic traditions, even in a dream. To receive the authentic transmission of the Buddha's robe may be closer in experience than to receive and hear Buddhist sutras. Even 1,000 experiences and 10,000 attainments are not as good as one realization and experience. A Buddhist patriarch is the realization of the same state of experience. We should never rank a Buddhist patriarch with common followers of philosophy and precepts. In conclusion, with regard to the merits of the kashaya of the patriarch's lineage, we can say that its authentic transmission has been received exactly, that its original configuration has been conveyed personally, and that it has been received and retained, together with the succession of the Dharma, without interruption until today. The authentic recipients are all ancestral masters who have experienced the same state and received the transmission of Dharma. They are superior even to bodhisattvas at the 10 sacred stages and the 3 clever stages. We should serve and venerate them, and should bow down to them, and humbly receive them upon our heads. If this principle of the authentic transmission of the Buddha's robe is believed just once by this body and mind, that is a sign of meeting Buddha, and it is the way to learn the state of Buddha. A life in which we would not accept this Dharma would be a sad life. We should profoundly affirm that if we cover the physical body just once with this kashaya, it will be a talisman that protects the body and ensures realization of the state of Bodhi. It is said that when we die, the believing mind, with a single phrase or a single verse, we never lack the brightness of long kalpas. When we die, the body and mind, with one real Dharma, the state may be also like this. Those mental images are without an abode and are irrelevant to what I possess. Even so, their merits are indeed as described above. The physical body is without an abode. Even so, it is as described above. The kashaya too is without an origin and also without a destination. It is neither our own possession nor the possession of anyone else. Even so, it actually abides at the place where it is retained, and it covers the person who receives and retains it. The merits acquired by virtue of the kashaya may also be like this. When we make the kashaya, the making is not the elaboration of the common, the sacred, and the like. The import of this is not perfectly realized by bodhisattvas at the 10 sacred or the 3 clever stages. Those who have not accumulated seeds of the truth in the past do not see the kashaya, do not hear of the kashaya, and do not know the kashaya, not in one life, not in 2 lives, not even if they pass countless lives. How much less could they receive and retain the kashaya? There are those who attain and those who do not attain the merit to touch the kashaya once with the body. Those who have attained this merit should rejoice. Those who have not attained it should hope to do so. Those who can never attain it should lament. All human beings and gods have seen, heard, and universally recognized that the Buddha's robe is transmitted, both inside and outside the great 1,000-fold world, only in the lineage of the Buddhist patriarchs. Clarification of the configuration of the Buddha's robe also is present only in the lineage of the patriarchs. It is not known in other lineages. Those who do not know it, and yet do not blame themselves, are stupid people. Even if they know 84,000 Samadhi Dharanis, without receiving the authentic transmission of the Buddhist patriarch's robe and dharma, without clarifying the authentic transmission of the Kashaya, they can never be the rightful successors of the Buddhas. How the living beings of other regions must long to receive exactly the authentic transmission of the Buddha's robe, as it has been authentically received in China. They must be ashamed, their sorrow in their hearts must be deep, that they have not received the authentic transmission in their own country. Truly, to meet the Dharma in which the robe and the Dharma of the world-honoured Tathagata have been authentically transmitted is the result of seeds of great merit from past nurtured prajna. Now in this corrupt age of the latter Dharma, there are many bands of demons who are not ashamed that they themselves lack the authentic transmission, and who envy the authentic transmission of others. Our own possessions and abodes are not our real selves. Just authentically to receive the authentic transmission, this is the direct way to learn the state of Buddha. In sum, remember that the Kashaya is the body of the Buddha and the mind of the Buddha. Further, it is called the clothing of liberation, called the robe of a field of happiness, called the robe of endurance, called the robe without form, called the robe of compassion, called the robe of the Tathagata, and called the robe of Anuttara Samyak Sambodhi. We must receive and retain it as such. In the great kingdom of Sung today, people who call themselves students of the precepts because they are drunk on the wine of the Shravaka are neither ashamed, regretful, nor aware that they have received the transmission of a lineage which is alien to their own clan. Having changed the Kashaya that has been transmitted from the western heavens and handed down through the ages from Han to Tang China, they follow small thoughts. It is due to the small view that they are like that, and they should be ashamed of their small view. Given that they now wear a robe, based on their own small thinking, they probably lack many other of the Buddhist dignified forms. Such things happen because their learning of and reception of the transmission of the Buddhist forms are incomplete. The fact is evident that the body and mind of the Tathagata has been authentically transmitted only in the lineage of the patriarchs, and it has not spread into the customs of those other lineages. If they knew only one Buddhist form in 10,000, they would never destroy the Buddha's robe. Not having clarified even the meaning of sentences, they have never been able to hear the fundamental. There again, to decide that coarse cotton is the only material for the robe runs deeply counter to the Buddha Dharma. Above all, it ruins the Buddha robe. Disciples of the Buddha should not wear a robe made according to this rule. Why? Because to uphold a view about cloth ruins the Kashaya. It is pitiful that the views of the Shravaka of the small vehicle are so tortuous. After their views about cloth have been demolished, the Buddha's robe will be realized. What I am saying about the use of silk and cotton is not the teaching of one Buddha or two Buddhas. It is the great Dharma of all the Buddhas to see rags as the best and purest material for the robe. when, for the present, we list the 10 sorts of rags among those rags. They include silk, cotton, and other kinds of cloth too. Must we not take rags of silk? If we are like that, we go against the Buddha's truth. If we hated silk, we would also have to hate cotton. Where is the reason to hate silk or cotton? To hate silk thread because it is produced by killing is very laughable. Is cotton not the habitat of living things? Sentiment about sentience and insentience is not liberated from the sentiment of the common and sentimental. How could it know the Buddha's Kashaya? There is further speaking of nonsense by those who bring forth arguments about transformed thread. This also is laughable. Which material is not a transformation? Those people believe the ears which hear of transformation, but they doubt the eyes which see transformation itself. They seem to have no ears in their eyes, and no eyes in their ears. Where are their eyes and ears at the moment of the present? Now remember, while we are collecting rags, there may be cotton that looks like silk, and there may be silk that looks like cotton. When we use it, we should not call it silk, and we should not call it cotton. We should just call it rags. Because it is rags, it is, as rags, beyond silk and beyond cotton. Even if there are human beings or gods who have survived as rags, we should not call them sentient, but they may be rags. Even if there are pine trees or chrysanthemums which have become rags, we should not call them insentient, but they may be rags. When we recognize the truth that rags are neither silk nor cotton, and that they are beyond pearls and jewels, rags are realized, and we meet rags for the first time. Before views about silk and cotton have withered and fallen, we have never even seen rags, even in a dream. If we retain views about the cloth, even if we have spent a lifetime receiving and retaining coarse cotton cloth as a kashaya, that is not the authentic transmission of the Buddha's robe. At the same time, the various kinds of kashaya include cotton kashaya, silk kashaya, and leather kashaya. All of these have been worn by Buddhas. They have the Buddhist merits of the Buddha's robe, and they possess the fundamental principle that has been authentically transmitted without interruption. People who are not liberated from common sentiment make light of the Buddha Dharma. Not believing the Buddha's words, they aim blindly to follow the sentiment of the common man. They must be called non-Buddhists who have attached themselves to the Buddha Dharma. They are people who destroy the right Dharma. Some claim to have changed the Buddha robe in accordance with the teaching of celestial beings. In that case, they must aspire to celestial Buddhahood. Or have they become the descendants of gods? The Buddha's disciples expound the Buddha Dharma for celestial beings. They should not ask celestial beings about the truth. It is pitiful that those who lack the authentic transmission of the Buddha Dharma are like this. The view of the celestial multitudes and the view of the Buddha's disciples are very different in greatness, but gods come down to seek instruction in the Dharma from the Buddha's disciples. The reason is that the Buddhist view and the celestial view are very different. Discard and do not learn the small views of Shravakas of precepts sects. Remember that they are the small vehicle. The Buddha says, one can repent for killing one's father or killing one's mother, but one cannot repent for insulting the Dharma. In general, the way of small views and fox-like suspicion is not the original intention of the Buddha. The great truth of the Buddha Dharma is beyond the small vehicle. No one outside of the patriarch state of truth, which is transmitted with the Dharma treasury, has known of the authentic transmission of the great precepts of the Buddhas. Long ago, the story goes, in the middle of the night on Obai, the Buddha's robe and Dharma are transmitted authentically onto the head of the sixth patriarch. This is truly the authentic tradition for transmission of the Dharma and transmission of the robe. It is possible because the fifth patriarch knows a person. Fellows of the fourth effect and the three clever stages, as well as the likes of bodhisattvas in the 10 sacred stages, and the likes of commentary teachers and sutra teachers of philosophical schools, would give the robe and Dharma to Jinshu. They would not transmit them authentically to the sixth patriarch. Remember the truth of knowing a person and of knowing oneself, which the Buddhist patriarchs transmit from rightful successor to rightful successor, is not easily supposed. Later, a monk asked the sixth patriarch, "Should we see the robe you received in the middle of the night on Obai as cotton, or should we see it as silk, or should we see it as raw silk? In short, as what material should we see it?" The sixth patriarch says, "It is not cotton, it is not silk, and it is not raw silk." The words of the founding patriarch of Soke are like this. Remember, the Buddha robe is not silk, not cotton, and not cotton crepe. Those who, on the contrary, heedlessly recognize the robe as silk, as cotton, or as cotton crepe, are the sort who insult the Buddha Dharma. How could they know the Buddha's kashaya? Furthermore, there are episodes of the precepts being taken with the Buddha's welcome. That the kashaya gained by these monks is utterly beyond discussion of silk and cotton, is the Buddha's instruction in the Buddhist truth. In another case, the robe of Sanavasa, when he is a layman, is a secular garment, but when he leaves family life, it becomes a kashaya. We should quietly consider this fact. We should not brush it aside as if we did not see or hear it. Moreover, there is a fundamental principle which has been authentically transmitted from Buddha to Buddha, and from patriarch to patriarch, and which the sort who count words in sentences cannot sense and cannot fathom. Truly, how could the 1,000 changes and the myriad transformations of the Buddha's truth belong in the limited area of ordinary folk. The real state of samadhi exists, and real practices of dharani exist, but those who count grains of sand can never find these valuable pearls inside their clothes. We should esteem as the right standard of the kashaya of all the Buddhas the material, colour, and measurements of the present kashaya, which has been received in the authentic transmission from Buddhist patriarchs. The precedents for it in the western heavens and the eastern lands, going back to ancient times and arriving at the present, are of long standing, and people who have distinguished the right precedents from the wrong have already transcended the state of enlightenment. Even though, outside of the Buddhism of the patriarchs, there are those who claim to have the kashaya, no original patriarch has ever affirmed their robes as the twigs and leaves of the original kashaya. How could their robes germinate the seeds of good roots? How much less could they bear real fruit? We now not only are seeing and hearing Buddha Dharma that we have not met in vast kalpas, we also have been able to see and to hear the Buddha's robe, to learn about the Buddha's robe, and to receive and to retain the Buddha's robe. This just exactly means that we are meeting the Buddha, we are hearing the voice of the Buddha, we are radiating the brightness of the Buddha, we are receiving and using the state received and used by the Buddha. We are receiving the one-to-one transmission of the mind of the Buddha, and we are getting the Buddha's marrow. For material to make the kashaya, we invariably use that which is pure. Pure describes material offered by a donor of pure faith, or bought at a market, or sent by celestial beings, or donated by dragons, donated by demons, or donated by kings and ministers, or even pure leather. We may use all such material. At the same time, we esteem the 10 sorts of rags as pure. The 10 sorts of rags are namely: 1. Rags chewed by an ox. 2. Rags gnawed by rats. 3. Rags scorched by fire. 4. Rags soiled by menstruation. 5. Rags soiled by childbirth. 6. Rags offered at a shrine. 7. Rags left at a graveyard. 8. Rags offered in petitional prayer. 9. Rags discarded by a king's officers. 10. Rags brought back from a funeral. We esteem these 10 sorts as especially pure material. In secular society they throw them away, but in Buddhism we use them. From these customs we can know the difference between the secular world and Buddhism. So when we want pure material, we should look for these 10 sorts. Finding them, we can know what is pure, and we can intuit and affirm what is not pure. We can know mind, and we can intuit and affirm body. When we obtain these 10 sorts, whether they are silk or whether they are cotton, we should consider their purity and impurity. If we understand that the reason we use these rags is to idly make ourselves shabby with shabby robes. That might be extremely stupid. Rags have always been used in Buddhism for their splendor and beauty. In Buddhism, what makes our attire shabby is clothes which have come from impurity, clothes of brocade, embroidered silk, silk twill, and sheer silk, clothes of gold, silver, precious gems, and so on. This is the meaning of shabbiness. In general, whether in the Buddhism of this land or of other worlds, when we use pure and beautiful cloth, it should be of these 10 sorts. Not only has it transcended the limitations of purity and impurity, it is also beyond the limited sphere of the superfluous and the absence of the superfluous. Do not discuss it as matter or mind. It is not connected with gain or loss. The fact is only that those who receive and retain the authentic transmission are Buddhist patriarchs. For when we are in the state of a Buddhist patriarch, we receive the authentic transmission. To receive and to retain this transmission as a Buddhist patriarch does not depend on manifestation or non-manifestation of the body, and does not depend on upholding or non-upholding of the mind, but the authentic transmission goes on being received. Absolutely, we should regret that in this country, Japan, monks and nuns of recent ages have, for a long time, gone without wearing the kashaya, and we should be glad that we can receive and retain the kashaya now. Even lay men and women who receive and keep the Buddhist precepts should wear the 5-stripe, 7-stripe, and 9-stripe kashaya. How then could people who have left family life fail to wear the kashaya? It is said that everyone from King Brahma and the god of the 6 heavens, down to secular men, secular women, and male and female slaves, should receive the Buddhist precepts and wear the kashaya. How could bhikshus and bhikshinis fail to wear it? It is said that even animals should receive the Buddhist precepts and wear the kashaya. How could disciples of the Buddha fail to wear the Buddha's robe? So those who want to become disciples of the Buddha, regardless of whether they are gods above, human beings, kings of nations, or government officials, and irrespective of whether they are lay people, monks, slaves, or animals, should receive and keep the Buddhist precepts, and should receive the authentic transmission of the kashaya. This is just the direct way to enter authentically into the state of Buddha. When washing the kashaya, you should mix miscellaneous powdered incense into the water. After drying the kashaya in the sun, fold it and put it in a high place. Serve offerings to it of incense and flowers, and make 3 prostrations. Then kneeling up, humbly receive it upon the head, and with the hands joined, render devotion by reciting the following verse. How great is the clothing of liberation, formless field of happiness, robe, devoutly wearing the Tathagata's teaching. Widely I will save living beings. After reciting this verse 3 times, stand up on the ground and wear the kashaya devotedly. During my stay in Sung, China, making effort on the long platform, I saw that my neighbour every morning, at the time of releasing the stillness, would lift up his kashaya and place it on his head. Then, holding his hands together in veneration, he would silently recite the verse. At that time, there arose in me a feeling I had never before experienced. My body was overfilled with joy, and tears of gratitude secretly fell and moistened the lapels of my gown. The reason was that when I had read the Agama Sutras previously, I had noticed sentences about humbly receiving the kashaya upon the head, but I had not clarified the standards for this behaviour, and had not understood it clearly. Seeing it done now, before my very eyes, I was overjoyed. I thought to myself, it is a pity that when I was in my homeland, there was no master to teach me this, and no good friend to tell me of it. How could I not regret, how could I not deplore, passing so much time in vain? Seeing it and hearing it now, I can rejoice in past good conduct. If I had been idly rubbing shoulders in the temples of my home country, how could I have sat shoulder to shoulder with this treasure of a monk who is actually wearing the Buddha's robe? Sadness and joy were not one-sided. Tears of gratitude fell in thousands and tens of thousands. Then I secretly vowed, one way or another, unworthy though I am, I will receive the authentic transmission of the right traditions of the Buddha Dharma, and out of compassion for living beings in my homeland, I will cause them to see and to hear the robe and the Dharma which have been authentically transmitted from Buddha to Buddha. The vow made at that time has now not been in vain. The bodhisattvas, in families and out of families, who have received and retained the kashaya are many. This is a matter in which to rejoice. People who have received and retained the kashaya should humbly receive it upon their head every day and night. The merit of this may be especially excellent and supremely excellent. The seeing and hearing of a phrase or a verse may be as in the story of on trees and on rocks, but the merit of the authentic transmission of the kashaya is hardly encountered through the 10 directions. In the 10th lunar month, in the winter of the 17th year of Kazhou in Great Sung, China, 2 Korean monks came to the city of Keigen-fu. One was called Chigen, the other Kei-un. Both of them were always discussing the meaning of Buddhist sutras, and they were also men of letters. But they had no kashaya and no patra. They were like secular people. It was pitiful that though they had the external form of bhikshus, they did not have the Dharma of bhikshus. This may have been because they were from a minor nation in a remote land. When people from our country who have the external form of bhikshus travel abroad. They are likely to be the same as those two monks. Shakyamuni Buddha himself received the kashaya upon his head for 12 years, never setting it aside. As already his distant descendants, we should emulate this. To turn the forehead away from prostrations, idly done for fame and gain, to gods, to spirits, to kings and to retainers, and to turn it now towards the humble reception upon the head of the Buddha's robe, is a joyful and great happy event. The first day of winter, in the first year of Ninji, written at Kanondori Koshoharinji Temple, a Shramana who entered Sung China and received the transmission of Dharma. Dogen.